E tipu e rea mō ngā rā o tō au. Ko tō ringaringa ki ngā rākau a te Pākehā, hei oranga mō tō tinana. Ko tō ngākau ki ngā taonga o tipuna, hei tiki tiki mō tō māhunga. Ko tō wairua ki tō atua, nāna nei nā mea katoa, mariore ki a tātou. Ko te mea tuatahi, mā kū ki tō tātou matua nui i te rangi, ko e rā te timatatanga me te whakamutinga o ngā mea katoa. Ka mihi atu ahau ki ngā tini mate, ki ngā tini aitua, kua hinga atu mei, kua hinga atu rā i te marae maha puta no te motu. Haere atu rā, moi mai i te rāriki. O te rā, tēnei hoki te mihi atu ki a koutou, o ngā tauwera o Aotearoa, i tautoko ana te kaupapa o te rā nei e. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Kia ora koutou. My name's Awerangi Tamihere, and I have the much pleasure of going last in the shortest straw for speaking to you all today with the panel today. A lot of what the panel has said is actually probably summarised in what I'm going to say today. So from my point of view, I'm probably able to give you a grassroots best practice from the community up of how do you look at poverty. But firstly, the question to us is if you're looking at what is poverty all about, for us, and we work in our organisation, community organisation Te Whānau Wapareta, tackling poverty is only a strategy. The question you must ask yourselves is what is the outcome you want to achieve for those people who are in poverty? Because if you cannot answer that first, you cannot identify the range of strategies to help position them in a positive outcomes way. So for us in Te Whānau Wapareta, the question is not about tackling poverty. What we're focused on is what is the roadmap for empowerment for those communities, those families who are looking at achieving outcomes for their own families and in future generations. So the most important question here is the mindset. If you start with reductionist thinking, you start with a thinking of problem, the very families, the very people that you're targeting will continue to think like that. If you start to change your language, start to use aspirational language, then you'll start to change the way that they look at the world and that they do feel they have a contribution to make. It sounds very romantic, so I'm actually going to give you a model of how we're doing that in Waiparaita on the ground. But also a model, I wear two hats. I work with a community organisation in West Auckland, but I also work with a commissioning agency called Te Poumatakana, which is a recently established agency late last year for whānau ora. And our particular agency, there are three in New Zealand, we're focused on North Island, and we're about commissioning positive outcomes for family across the North Island. So I'm going to give you an example of a community-based organisation looks at outcomes for families that are impoverished, but not only that, we're able to draw on the information from the community to help feed in policy at a commissioning level as well. So from today, you'll start to see that it's not just a community agency, it's not just policy strategies, it's not just a government agency or a community agency. To address the issues that we're looking at with our families, to achieve aspirational outcomes for them, you must have a comprehensive, all-in-one approach that it takes the needs and focus from the community right through the government. So hopefully today I can share a bit of those insights with you. First thing for me is if I look at about Te Whānau Wapareta, we are actually focusing on families in West Auckland who are severely impoverished, who have a lot of issues and needs, and I don't need to go on about the statistics for those with you. But the reality is for these families, they are multi-generational families who don't have just one generation of poverty. They have at least one, now two generations of poverty. And so while we can throw a range of services at them, the issue I have is more fundamental than that. Because what we see with some of our families in West Auckland, they go to a whole range of services. They come in and out of services. The problem is they still don't move out of poverty. So what is going on? It's a lot more fundamental than putting services to our people. Question one, have we ever sat down and asked them, what outcomes do they want to achieve for themselves? What do they want to do? No, because in the past, it tended to be, here's a range of services, come along, choose which one can support your need and move on. So the first thing is that when you're looking at poverty, you must take a client-centric or a family-centric view of outcomes. When you're looking at, you must always start with a client group. What outcomes do they want to achieve first? First question. Once you've identified what outcomes they want to achieve, what services, what range of supports do you put in place to achieve those outcomes? The third most important question is, and some of our panellists have touched on that today, what measurement systems do you put in place to measure the outcomes, to measure the change that those families made over time to reach their outcomes. That's a whole new world of thinking. It's something that has been started to engage in community organisations and some government departments, but is particularly an area that we're very focused on. Why are we focused on that in Te Whānau Waipareta? We're a community organisation. We're not just a provider of services. If you want to work and be in the community, provision of services is one aspect. There's two other aspects that go for it. You must also, beside it, develop a hands-on research unit, policy unit, that helps shape, transforms, and works with those families to put in good policies for moving forward. Because you've got to try things on the ground, you've got to look at what works, you've got to identify game breakers, which change all the time, but you also must have strong research units and policy units that can actually measure the robustness of those. The third thing that Te Whānau Waipareta does, it does have an urban Māori advocacy team. So it does look at advocating the needs of urban Māori across the country at a national level. Because the reality is, you must have a three-pronged approach to make any change. Community service provision is one aspect, policy, research, measuring and validating the outcomes achieved is a second level, and also there is an advocacy component. Because we're a community-based organisation, what makes us different? Our Board of Trustees is actually voted by the community. It is not professionals. It is not made of anyone else except for the community there. So, because we have a governance group, and this is one I want to raise with you as another point, we have a governance group who, yes, we have to comply with over 50 contracts to 18 different funders we have in Te Whānau Waipareta. But that's not the most important priority. Because it's a governance group that are responsible for the families of West Auckland, in 2 years' time, we hope to release our first family outcomes report. So our Board of Trustees won't just provide an annual report, they'll provide an annual outcomes report on what actually were the changes that happened for families on the ground in West Auckland. We have contracts with funders, and some funders are starting to change, but let me give you an example. Funders give you a funder-centric view of what they think should happen on the ground for families. It's not necessarily a match with our families say they want to do. So at the moment, our organisation is a dual process. We have a huge process set up to report on funders' contracts, but we've set up a brand new system. We're actually going to report on what the outcomes are that families want. We've gone through a robust process of developing an outcomes framework with families in West Auckland. We've just launched that a few weeks ago. We have families sit down with all of our workers, identifying the outcomes they want to achieve by service. We've now started mapping an outcomes management program where we map the outcomes achieved at service level through to clusters of services across our organisation to achieving the overall outcomes they want to achieve in Waipareta. Families in West Auckland have identified 43 key outcomes they actually want to achieve. So when you sit on the ground and work with families, they actually can tell you what they want. Now, if you start from where they want, that is the first way to start to engage with them. Not only engage with them in the short term, because the issue we have is that it's about not an in and out approach, providing a service and going. How do you know those families are going to make achieve sustained outcomes over time? Because what you want to see achieved is that within a generation from now, their families are starting to go through education, they are achieving well. So that's one of the things that we're focused on. So our organisation provides a range of services. As some of the other providers have said today, they've had to be integrated. So we provide services across health, social services, education and justice. Why? Because the needs of families in poverty are complex. The needs of families in poverty don't require one solution. The needs of family require short-term solutions, medium-term solutions and long-term solutions. Not one or the other is right or wrong, but you must have a comprehensive program to do that. Not one solution can support it all. Not only that, we have, for example, a centre in Waipareta, which you can see online, where we now have health sector, DHB secondary services, we have GHP clinic, GP clinic, we have WINS in office, because we recognise not only us provides the services, they need to be navigated across a comprehensive range of services by other providers as well. But the one thing about Te Whānau and Waipareta that supports these families is they have the intelligence on the ground. Our workers work in West Auckland, they live in West Auckland, they breathe, they know all the families in West Auckland. And so what was talked about before is they become the navigators for life with these families. They often take an intensive role, so a lot of our families come in first for crisis. They have immediate needs that need resolving. Of course, they don't want to know what their outcomes are going to be in a few years, they want help straight away. As those workers have a really important role in that relationship work to get them out of the thinking that they can move, they'll be beneficiaries for the next 2 generations. And I'm going to give you an example because these are predeterminants. If families are going to be successful and move through at least 1 or 2 generations of dependency on benefits. The first thing is our workers must have relational work. They must build a relationship in order to understand the problems, but then also the moment they engage with that particular individual or family, they must build a relationship to actually understand their aspirations. So problems initially when they're in crisis, but also starting to build a relationship with their aspirations. Another thing that our workers must have if they're working with them is ability to adjust an approach. So they might come in from one particular service, but what we're saying is they need flexibility because families' needs change. Their immediate circumstances change. You need navigators to take them out of one service and say, well, in fact, something else has come up for them. They want something that's actually a lot more important. So you must be able to navigate them across a range of services that meet what's their needs, not meets the needs of what we say we have to do in a contract. So you must have a very different approach in an organisation that's quite agile and has an ability to adjust to suit the family's needs of what they want. The third important point is co-determination. Co-determination is very important, where you work through with the family the various possible sources of action. Because if you start to they feel like they've got a dependency on you, they don't have very much ownership of you, yes, they'll do all the services you want, but they'll still feel that you're doing it to them and they don't own it, and they'll walk away and go back to where they were. They must own the action that they take on board. That very first engagement with those workers in the ground sets a scene for them being able to start to get out of what was once a one-generational or two-generational cycle of deprivation. Those are really fundamentals, but they're about the roadmap to empowerment. Secondly, whānau, families, have the right to claim ownership over their own path for transformation. It is not my place as a provider, it's not my place as a funder, it's not my place as a researcher to predetermine what their own path is for transformation. They must they must own it, they must map that out with them. In our organisation, for example, we've just arranged a whole lot of assessment tools, outcomes assessment tools. So when families come in, they get navigators, and they actually map the outcomes they want to achieve for themselves and their families. Initially in the short term, and once they're able to manage their crises, we move them to stability. So they then look at the outcomes they want to achieve to be as a family that's stable. Then we move them on to a longer term goal of successful, flourishing families. So you move them from crisis to stability to success. That doesn't happen overnight. That doesn't happen in any 3-year contract. From our point of view, it takes a generation to change, to see that transformation in families from our experience. To date, we've just recently run a research contract for 2 years where we've had 3 to 4 generations of the same families come through to whānau and Waiparaira. But you know what? They're successful. And so we've got a research project not to look at what the gaps are, we've got a research project to actually look at over 25 years of successful change those families have made that are all now in university, that are all now employment, that are all now owning their houses. So the thing is, change can happen and it can work, but it takes time. Probably the weakness for us is that how do you measure that? What's the data to show that you have made a change and measure those outcomes? We have all the data in our funding contracts that shows the outputs achieved, the number of families achieved, but none of those contracts actually pick up what was a change for those families over time that made them successful. So we're developing, that's why our research unit is really important for our organisation, policy team. We're developing our own research to look and inform the successful determinants with our families to help shape how we move forward. So that's an example of a community on the ground and how it's moving forward. The next important part that I do want to go to is a commissioning agency. So you'll be able to research it, you'll be able to find out on waiparaira.com about Waiparaira. There's a number of things. In fact, on waiparaira.com is our annual plan you can PDF and download. On waiparaira.com also, we've also put down our outcomes and measurement plan that we started looking at too. So that gives you some more detailed information about Waiparaira. Te Pou Matakana is a commissioning agency looking at whānau audit outcomes for families across the North Island. Te Pou Matakana has taken quite a different approach to other commissioning agencies, and it started with a commissioning for outcomes model. So rather than dictate and identify and have a research team say these are the services, these are issues for our families in North Island, these are what you need to put in place, we've taken a very different approach. For us, there's 2 principles, co-design and co-production. And that if you're going to get sustained outcomes for families over time, you must design it together, you must produce it together, because that gives you the very best chance of sustainable solutions over time for families that they own. So Te Pou Matakana is a process where it is working through its providers. There's about 21 collectives across the North Island who are coming up with the ground-up data, who they provide to Te Pou Matakana what families on the ground see as their outcomes. Te Te Pou Matakana looks at that and has identified a number of products that could best suit those families on the ground, rather than determining top-down. Te Pou Matakana is now in a process where it has one product released called Whānau Direct, which is about meeting the immediate needs of families. You can go online and see that. The second product it has at the process it's rolling out is Collective Impact. Collective Impact is a model whereby you have a range of actors, a range of organisations to come together to serve a highly complex issue for families in a particular area. But Collective Impact isn't about giving providers more services. Collective Impact is agreeing on what is the outcome, what is the shared outcome those organisations want to come together on and measure to make sure there's a change in outcomes. So we're quite excited about that. So in Te Pou Matakana, the aim is that in 2 years' time, as well as the government data at a national level, for the first time we will be collecting transactional, outcome-based, aspirational data from the ground up about what is being achieved for families and what is working. Now, when you get a community organisation, I've used Waipareta as one example, and then you get Te Pou Matakana, which is an example of a commissioning agency, which is taking commissioning for outcomes approach in a very different way of thinking, pulling that together and then feeding it up to government on what's happening on the ground. You're more likely to get a whole of government, whole of community, whole of systemic model to start to look at change on the ground. But what I'm trying to demonstrate here, it's not one or the other. Both feeds off each other. When you're looking at issues that affect people, take it from their worldview, right? For us, it's a whānau-centric, it's a family worldview. What are the outcomes they want to achieve? Because we all assume what they are, even as provider, even our workers and our organisation assume that they know what's best for families. But when you actually work with families and see what they want, very different on the ground. They want things quite differently. So you must listen to what they want. You must measure the change from their point of view or what they want to see happen and move forward on it. I won't get into today, but we're quite heavily involved with a process called Social Return on Investment, SROI. We're about to engage on one in 2 months' time. We're actually looking at identifying the social value, the social return, as a result of taking a particular service. For us, that's only one tool. In fact, it's like the full stop at the end of a sentence, because we actually also want to document the change over time that those families make and also measure that, as well as looking at the actual end result of those families. So that's the first thing, a whānau-centric approach. Secondly, we are taking an aspirational model. This is an aspirational model. Because if you come in with that attitude, you'll get a different change in the way you work with families over time. Thirdly, having community intelligence on the ground. Having families who do work with navigators, who do understand the families on the ground, works well. Fourth thing, measurement of outcomes. Measuring outcomes from their point of view is extremely important. Because at the end of the day, that's what you want to do. So don't forget, you measure what you value. That's the most important thing. For our organisation, what's important for us? We want to measure the outcome changed for successful families in Te Whānau Waipareta. As a result, it's changed our whole methodology and whole ethos about what we measure. Yes, we measure outcomes that government wants us to measure, but they aren't necessarily the outcomes that our families told us they want. So at the moment, we have a dual process in place, but measuring what they want has a huge impact in helping form policy further down the track. The last thing is that long-term relationships over time, there's a place for that. 3-year funding contracts don't do that, but there are a range of community organisations across the country that have those relationships over time, such as tribal groups, such as example as us. They do know their communities best. If you're not sure what you do, just go to a local community organisation in your area, sit with them, see what happens, and you'll hear firsthand about what the changes are that need to happen. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, kia ora koutou katoa.